Hello, and good evening, everyone who is tuning in to tonight's 8 to 10 webinar. My name is Sean. I am Irish and I work in the school on Via Meravigli in Milan. You may have had a webinar with me. I have done very many webinars since the school has been closed. I would like all of you to introduce yourselves in the comments. So welcome everyone. Please introduce yourselves in the comments, your name, where you come from, maybe your job or something else interesting about you. How are you today? How are you finding this period? Anything that you want to share. I'm here to talk to any of you who want to discuss something. Otherwise, the subject of our focus webinar today is architecture. So, exactly what we'll be talking about is describing architecture and presenting a structure, presenting a building, giving a history, talking about the qualities of that structure, of that building. And really, to do that, we need to use passives. And that will be the major grammar point of today's lesson, talking about passives, talking about architecture using passives. This is a subject that I found quite interesting. I studied the history of art and architecture. So I studied a lot of architectural history. And I know that Italy is really a country which has an extraordinary architectural history. It was one of the reasons that I decided I should come to Italy. And so yes, and as I said, using passives. So you may or may not have done the lessons about passives. There are several lessons about passives across the different levels. Present, past, and present perfect passives we'll be looking at in this focus, but really passives in any tense have the same rules and we use them for the same reasons. We use them when the object is more significant than the subject, or we do not know the subject. And that's often the case with architecture. We don't know who built a structure, or it's not as significant as the structure itself. We want to place emphasis on the building. And yeah, it's a very good way to discuss this topic in particular. I would say, speaking about architecture, you are really using passives almost always because the object is very significant and we don't really know who who created the specific parts of a building. So we will go into the focus, and like I said, anyone arriving a few minutes in at any point in the webinar, I know people come in and out, just please introduce yourself, say a few things about yourself, let me know who you are, and throughout the webinar, I will be asking questions, there will be activities, and I would ask you to answer, to suggest solutions, share your opinion, anything you want to share, please do. These webinars are much better with a lot of participation, and it's just me, so otherwise I will be explaining passives by myself, which you may find useful watching back, but I would like some participation. So, architecture. Discuss the questions with a partner. Question number 1. Do you prefer modern architecture or older styles? 2. Has anything been built, renovated in your city recently? Have you visited any famous buildings Which ones? What is your favorite building or structure and why? Describe it to a partner. So these are some nice warm-up questions to think about architecture, to think about what architecture means for you, and thinking about the vocabulary that we need for this subject. So the first one, do you prefer modern architecture or older styles? So I think I maybe share some different kinds of architecture. So I'll think about an Italian city. You often have ancient or Roman architecture. So these would be things like the Colosseum. In Milan, we have Colonna di San Lorenzo. In very many Italian cities, you have Roman architecture, things like the Arena in Verona. Very many cities have some remnant of the Roman period, and it's something very nice about Italian cities because in other parts of the world you don't usually find buildings or structures so old. After the Roman period, we have medieval. Often we can also say Romanesque or Gothic architecture. So this is architectural history. You may or may not be interested. The period after the Roman Empire is generally called the medieval period, in English, the Middle Ages, the medieval period. And there were two kinds of architecture in this period, Romanesque or Gothic. Romanesque is older than Gothic architecture and more like Roman architecture, but not built by the Romans, built after the Romans. And then Gothic is influenced by Northern Europe. So certainly in Milan, the Duomo of Milan, the cathedral in Milan, is a really amazing example of Gothic architecture, and very many cities in Italy have Gothic cathedrals. I can think of Siena, also has a Gothic cathedral. A lot of the architecture of Venice is Gothic. And then Romanesque architecture would be, I can think of Ravenna as a city with a lot of Romanesque architecture. And yeah, cities like Florence as well, quite a bit of Romanesque architecture. But again, in Italy, there are so many ancient monuments, so many different periods of architecture. Then we have, of course, Renaissance. Well, I'm just going to say we have classical architecture after this. It's a bit of a general term. In the Renaissance, they rediscover the architecture of ancient Rome, and they start building what we consider now, in English, the term we use is classical architecture. So buildings with columns and those kind of buildings, you know. Certainly in Italy, I would say this is the predominant style in every Italian city, classical architecture. But in a lot of European cities, everything is quite classical. And this goes from the 15th century into the 19th century, so classical architecture. After classical, we have, of course, modern architecture, which we still have today, of course, kind of this very simple style developed by people like Le Corbusier, which is, you know, simple shapes, simple structures, not really much decoration the way you have in a classical architecture. More functional, more modern kind of building. Yes. So the question, do you prefer modern architecture or older styles? For me, this is a difficult question to answer. For me, it really depends on the building depends on the architect. It depends because I think every style has very beautiful examples. I can think of beautiful medieval buildings, beautiful classical buildings, and beautiful modern buildings. I really don't have a preference. I do think that maybe in the past there was more beautiful buildings being created than currently, but I still think that in this moment there's a lot of beautiful contemporary architecture, beautiful modern architecture. Um, so yeah, it depends, I think. And I think a great thing about very many cities in Italy, especially Milan, is that you have Roman, you have medieval architecture, but you also have very contemporary architecture, and it's all very interesting and very beautiful in many cases. So I don't have a preference. Do you have a preference? Please let me know. Has anything been built or renovated in your city recently? So this is our first passive of the focus. This is a question. So the form is a little different. So has anything been built or renovated recently? So has been, this is a present perfect passive. So we know the present perfect, have or has plus the past participle. With the passive, as with any tense in the passive, to be takes the tense, so has been, and then that's followed by another past participle. So present perfect passive. So here we have it. Has or have, depending on the person. Past participle of to be and past participle of the main verb. So the main verb here is built or renovated, two different verbs, to build and to renovate, and then has been. This is how you form a present perfect passive. And we use the tenses for the same reasons that we do in the active form. We use the present perfect because we're talking about something that happened in the past without specifying the point in the past in which it happened. So we have Mary from Rome. Good evening, Sean. Thank you. Thank you for including the accent in my name, Mary. Very attentive. I have an accent in my name because my name is Irish and we have our own version of pronunciation. So thank you for noticing that. Has anything been built or renovated in your city recently? So I think maybe I will speak a little bit about Dublin because my original city, I grew up outside Dublin, but my family is from Dublin and I know Dublin very well. I went to university in Dublin, and I think it would be interesting maybe to hear about Dublin rather than Milan. So Dublin has been very renewed in recent years. There's been many big programs to rebuild sections of the city, to modernize the city, because for very many years there wasn't any building in the city, and a lot of the areas were run down. This is a good way to describe run down in a bad condition. This rundown is when a building is not maintained, not kept in a good condition. And a lot of parts of Dublin were run down, particularly an area near the sea, which we call the Dockland. And they built a lot of new buildings in the city, in this area of the city. Very nice buildings for the most part. For me, the problem with this development was that it's not very integrated with the rest of the city. I never spent time in this new area of the city because it was all offices and business and corporation, as I think modern zones in many cities tend to be. So I spent all my time in the older part of the city, so I didn't get to enjoy this. But yes, there's been a lot of building and renovation in Dublin in the past few years. How about Rome, Mary, the eternal city? I visited Rome once, and I know that the architecture is really spectacular. But I suppose Rome is not known as a modern city. It's a very historic city. Um, yeah, a very historic city, very important city architecturally, but I'm not one where I imagine there's a lot of new building or renovation, though I'd be interested to hear. I'm not sure about the outskirts of Rome, if there are new areas developed there. So, have you visited any famous buildings? Which ones? Yes, as I said earlier, if you were here at that point, I studied the history of architecture in university. So we studied a lot of particularly famous buildings, and one we went on a class trip. So my university class, we all went together to Paris to study and to discuss the architecture in Paris. And I visited very many of the wonderful buildings in Paris because Paris, like Milan, has a very big range of periods in time and very modern buildings and very old buildings. And we went to see Notre Dame before it burned down. One that I liked a lot was the Pompidou Center, which is, of course, by an Italian architect, uh, Ponte, I think. I'm not sure about that, but Ponte or Renzo Piano, I can't remember. One of those two. I get them confused. But the Pompidou Center, which is a postmodern building, a very interesting building, which I enjoyed. What famous buildings have you all visited? In Rome, I went to see the Colosseum, of course, and St. Peter's and all of those buildings. So I know all of those buildings from Rome. What is your favorite building or structure? Why? Describe it to a partner. So, have you traveled a lot, haven't you? I haven't really. I've been in Italy and in France and in Germany, and then obviously in Ireland, where I come from. So, 4 countries. I don't think it's too much. And yeah, I mean, in Europe, we're very lucky that you don't have to go very far to go to amazing places like Paris or Berlin. And I've been in very many different parts of Italy as well. And Italy is a very diverse country itself with a lot to see. I loved the architecture in Berlin as well. It's a very modern city, but a lot of great contemporary modern architecture, new developments, very much a city on the cutting edge, I would say. So cutting edge, I would say, is super modern, extremely to date. So Mary, where have you visited? What buildings have you seen? And what is your favorite building that you have seen? Your favorite building or structure? Um, my favorite building, I mean, it's difficult. It's a difficult one to choose. There are so many wonderful buildings in the world, and it's difficult to compare very modern and very historic buildings because they're great in different ways. Um, Here in Milan, a building that I really love, that not so many, some people have visited and other people know. It's a villa called a Villa Necchi. It's in the center of Milan, very central. You can walk from the Duomo. It takes maybe 5 minutes, and it's a kind of a 20th century villa from the beginning of the 20th century, the 1930s, and it's a really beautiful, really exquisite building, I would say. Very sophisticated, a very rich family lived there, and they had wonderful taste, and all the best architects in this period in Italy built the house and decorated. So I think a lot of people, if you don't know about it. So I think if you go to Milan, I would really recommend the Villa Necchi. I think it's my favorite that I can think of off the top of my head. Yes, but there is a new modern building, and its name is La Nuvola, in English, the cloud. Okay, so you're talking about Rome. Yes, I said it was very historic, but there is a new modern building. Its name is La Nuvola. Okay, interesting. I'm not familiar with this building. Yeah, it's good to hear that there's some kind of new developments in Rome. I would be interested to see what that is like and to investigate. In Milan, we have a lot of new districts and new areas. We have City Life, Piazza Gaiolenti, a lot of developments, a lot of new skyscrapers are being built in this period in Milan. So yeah, great stuff, guys. Thanks, Mary, for your answers. Um, so here we have a little text about a skyscraper in London. Your task is to find passives in the text. What tenses are they? So I'm going to read through the text, and anyone who's watching, in the comments, find passives in the text. Okay? Let me put up a banner. Mhm. To find passives in this text. Okay, Mary, I have recently been in Ecuador. I visited a lot of places, and a part of the natural beauty there. And apart from, just a little correction, Mary. Apart from the natural beauty, there are a lot of interesting buildings, like the Panecillo. It is a tall building where you can admire the whole city of Quito. That's great. That's a wonderful, interesting place to travel. Mary, Ecuador. I've never been in South America, but I know that in South America there's a lot of interesting modern architecture because there were you don't have the same kind of ancient cities that you do in Europe. So in the 20th century, they built cities in a very interesting, very dynamic way. I know in Brazil, there's a lot of very interesting modern architecture, and in Argentina as well. So yeah, I'm sure. I mean, Quito, interesting because you would always think of the natural beauty if you think of a place like Ecuador. But yeah, places have a lot of different dimensions. Very interesting, Mary. Please keep sharing any of your thoughts and try and find the passives in this text. So first of all, let me read the text. So, a unique commercial skyscraper is located at 20 Fenchurch Street in London's financial district. It was nicknamed the walkie-talkie because of its shape, but a few years ago it earned a different nickname. It was discovered that when sunlight shines over the concave mirrored face, it is direct mirrored facade it is reflected directly onto the streets below the building. Temperatures as high as 70 degrees Celsius have been observed during the summer, and properties along the street, as well as a parked car, have been damaged. After these events, the building was given the nicknames Walkie Scorchy and Fry Scraper. In 2015, it was awarded the Carbuncle Cup for worst new building in the UK. Oh dear, some problems with this building. Yeah, in London, they really push the envelope with their modern buildings. So push the envelope, really push the boundaries. I would say super modern, like for for Berlin, what did I say? On the cutting edge, to push the envelope, push the boundaries, super modern. Yeah, I mean, it's a very dynamic city. Things like the Shard are really extraordinary modern buildings, but this one has had some issues. Yeah, I think with contemporary architecture, sometimes they try to be interesting and different without really being very practical. I mean, it's very impractical if it's causing this kind of damage. I think a very important word that we had here is facade, which is a French word, the face of a building. So you describe the facade, the face, the front of the building. So Mary has been finding the passives excellent work. So is located, wonderful, was nicknamed, excellent, was discovered, yes, is reflected, excellent, has been observed, have been damaged, was given, was awarded. Really great work. I think that's absolutely all of them. Yeah. So what tenses are these? So I was talking about present perfect passives earlier, and we have two other kinds. So we have past and present passives as well. So present and past passives are very easy to distinguish. You have was and is. So was nicknamed, is reflected. As I said before, to be is what changes with the passives. You will always have the main verb in the past participle after to be. And to be will be in the tense that you want to, of the time you want to refer to, that the active verb, that the main verb would usually be in the active sentence. So, let's say, the people of London nicknamed it the walkie-talkie. It was nicknamed. So, nicknamed, it's the past simple. We put to be in the past simple, was nicknamed. It is reflected directly onto the, so the sun reflects directly onto the streets. It is reflected. Yeah? Okay. So reflects, present simple. We put to be in present simple is. So that's the secrets of passives. You can see here was nicknamed, is reflected, was discovered. And then we have been observed, have been damaged, which is the present perfect passives, which we were discussing before. So great work identifying those, Mary. So how are passives formed? A solid foundation. So subject plus to be plus past participle. Example, the walkie-talkie was awarded the Carbuncle Cup. So yeah, as I said, in every tense it's the same. Subject to be plus past participle. You just have to think of what tense the main verb would be in an active sentence and put to be in that tense. So to be in tense of main verb in active clause. Some people like to remember it this way, other people like to remember each form individually. So is present passive, is plus past participle, past passive was plus past participle, present perfect passive, have or has been plus past participle. Depends on which you find easier. There's no correct way to remember this. So obviously here we have to fill the gaps. So we have a verb and we have what kind of passive it is. We have what tense we need to place these in. So past simple, present perfect, past simple, present perfect, and present simple. So anyone who's watching, please fill in the gaps. Fill in the gaps with the correct passive form. So I will read through these, leaving a gap, and I want you to, in the comments, write the number and write the verb, how it should be. So the Sydney Opera House, something, open, in 1973. Many of Italy's historic buildings, something, to the UNESCO World Heritage Sites list. The Eiffel Tower, this is negative, with build in 1999. The Pyramid of Giza, negative, turn into a theme park. And the Empire State Building, negative, used as an antenna to contact aliens. These are quite interesting. So we already have Mary working away, was opened or added, wasn't built. Fantastic. Was opened, past simple passive. Have been added. I think, oh no, Mary, you had are added. So it's the present perfect passive. The present perfect have or has been, and not present simple. Maybe you misread this, what was in the brackets. So have or have been, has or have been added. And then wasn't built. Yes, very good. So of course, another thing you have to be aware of with passives is remembering your past participles. For the most part, they're regular, ed, opened, added, but sometimes built, something like this, built to the regular, to build, built. So just keep those in mind, of course, and I'll give you a minute to get the other ones. I wonder if you know what a theme park is. So, theme park is a park with roller coasters and amusements. For example, Disneyland. So something like Disneyland is the classic example. So you have roller coasters and amusements, um, things like that, and it usually follows some kind of theme, which is why we call them a theme park. So, very good, hasn't been turned into excellent. So you have the hang of the present perfect passives. Very good, excellent, hasn't been turned into. And the last one I'm not sure of. Okay, thank you anyway, Mary. I really appreciate your participation. So, the Empire State Building not used as an antenna to contact aliens. Present simple passive. So, present simple passive is, and how do we make a present simple passive isn't used? Isn't used. So I think present simple passives can maybe be confusing because when we see a past participle, we don't think about the present tense or certainly not present simple. But this is the way the passives work. I know that it's similar to the way they work in Italian. I'm not sure about Spanish or French, if we have any Spanish or French students watching us from MIS Lyon or Valencia. But I know that in Italian it's similar to this. And yeah, present simple passive is positive, is used, negative isn't used. Always to be with the past participle, and to be changes tense, but the past participle is always there, always the same. But very good, Mary, you got most of those. So you have a whole new text, a whole new little paragraph, and once again, find passives in this text. $1 million question. So I will read through this one. The Chuo Shinkansen rail line will be built between the two major Japanese cities, Tokyo and Nagoya. The trains are expected to reach speeds of 505 kilometers per hour, which means a distance of 286 kilometers can be covered in only 40 minutes. The train's speed is increased through the use of magnets, which reduce friction. Originally, this new rail system was projected to cost €40.6 billion, but because of the need to dig so many underground tunnels, the designers now say the project will be completed at a cost of €71.8 billion. Very, very expensive. A rail line, a high-speed rail, which Japan is, of course, so famous for its fast trains, some of the fastest trains in the world. Very efficient system. 286 kilometers in 40 minutes is very impressive. I wouldn't mind trains at those speeds going around Europe. Certainly there are some high-speed trains in Italy, but in Ireland, no. My family lived about, I'm not sure how many kilometers, maybe 100 kilometers from Dublin, and it was a 2-hour train journey to Dublin. So 286 kilometers in 40 minutes is a bit faster than that. Yeah. So find the passives. I'll give you a moment. You did very well in the last text finding them, so I'm sure you'll be able to do it again. It's the same 3 kinds of passives we've been looking at: present, past, and present perfect. is a delay sometimes with the comments, fortunately, so they arrive a while after you say them. But I'm sure your answers are on their way. I think I'll just reveal the answers anyway, so we can move on. So, will be built. Oh, we have a future passive. I thought it was just present, past, present perfect. So we have a future passive. And how do future passive work? Future passives work. They work like every passive. So, subject will be plus past participle. Oh, here we go. Mary noticed before I did. Tenses are future passive, like will be built, will be completed. Present passive, such as are expected, is increased. And past passive, that was projected. Yeah, very good. So we are talking about the future here. Can be covered. Which tense is it? Oh, very good. What is can be covered? What is can? Can is a modal verb. This is what we would call a modal passive, which can have active modal sentences. So why can't you have modal passives, you know? And like, if you think of an active modal sentence, it doesn't have a tense the way that, you know, past or present. It's a modal tense, a modal sentence, a sentence expressing some kind of value or opinion about a situation. And it's the same with passive. And in an active sentence, would, can, could, should, plus the infinitive. Any modal verb is plus the infinitive. So you do the same thing to be. So modal verb plus be. The bare infinitive, the infinitive without to, and past participle. It's a modal passive. It's a modal passive. So it's really the same as a future simple passive, because will is a kind of modal verb, a modal form. So it follows the same rule. Will be built, can be covered, are expected, is increased, was projected, will be completed. So great work, Mary. You had all the tenses there, and I was happy to clarify about modal passive. So yes, future and modal passives. Subject, modal to be plus past participle, and just be the bare infinitive. No problem. I'm here to clarify anything that you're not sure about. So I think we'll skip on to this slide, maybe to finish some useful phrases for architecture, some very descriptive phrases for architecture. So, work in progress, to demolish, a skyline, masterpiece, and an eyesore. And we have the definitions. To destroy something, to restore something or make it new again, not yet finished, a person's greatest work, unpleasant to look at, the profile of a building against the sky. So, some interesting words to talk about buildings. Very common words that we use a lot in this context, which, of course, in every context you discover in English, there's new vocabulary, so you have to learn it if you ever want to speak about architecture. And Mary, try and match the words to the definitions before we close. those up just to round off the webinar. Wonderful. Not yet finished. Work in progress. Exactly. Not completed. Not finished. Not resolved. A work in progress. To demolish. To destroy. Absolutely. Skyline, the profile of buildings, 100%. Yeah, we talk about the skyline of a city. What is the skyline like? Is it high rise, low rise, mid rise? High rise are skyscrapers. Low rise are 1 or 2 stories, and mid rise are somewhere in between. I think many Italian cities are mid rise, not skyscrapers, but not small houses, not 1 or 2 stories either. So a masterpiece. So you're going for renovate to restore. Absolutely. Before that, a masterpiece, a person's greatest work. Eyesore, unpleasant to look at, and renovate to restore something to make it new again. So I like so masterpiece and eyesore. Those are kind of opposites, and I quite like the word eyesore because sore is a kind of a pain or an unpleasant feeling to be sore. So eyesore, it hurts your eyes. And yes, some people consider skyscrapers or modern buildings to be eyesores. Depends a little bit on your perspective. So then we have some questions using these words, which we don't have time to go through all of them, unfortunately. But number 5 there, which structures are eyesores? What could be done to improve them? I know in Milan, a lot of people think that Torre Velasca is an eyesore. I quite like it personally. I think it's very striking, very interesting. A lot of buildings like that in Dublin as well have been demolished, have been knocked down. To knock down has the same meaning as demolish. And for me, it's a shame to do this, even if the building is a bit of an eyesore. Maybe it's not the most beautiful because, it's part of history. It's part of the city at that time, even if you don't think that it's so attractive. It's part of the cityscape. It's part of the skyline. For me, it's sad when they knock these buildings down. So just to round up, I think really the 2 most important slides are the subject to be past participle. And like I said, the tense changes for to be, and the past participle is always the same. So past simple passive to be in the past simple, present passive to be in the present perfect passive to be in the present perfect. And future and modal passive, it's the same thing. You put to be in the future simple, will plus be, or a modal verb, can plus be, could plus be, should plus be, would plus be, must plus be, anything, any modal verb. So that is the time we have for tonight's webinar. Thank you very much, Mary from Rome, for all of your lovely comments throughout this webinar. You had some interesting ideas about architecture, and you were very, uh, you seem to understand the passives. A few questions here and there, but for the most part, I think that you have a good grasp, a good idea. So great. Yes, a lovely evening to you too, Mary. Bye bye.